My name is Harish Subramanian. I'm a director here at greatlearning. I'm heading the postgraduate program in cloud computing, of which you are all hoping to be a part, I assume, or at the very least you're interested in learning a little bit more about the cloud computing industry, what are the opportunities in this industry, and what the program entails. Today's session will run in 3 parts. The first part will cover a little bit about what really the opportunity is. What is the big hype about cloud computing as the coming or as the come revolution. The second part will in the second part we'll briefly talk about the program itself, the benefits of the program, what kind of opportunities are available, how do we approach this program, how have we designed it for you in conjunction with the Illinois Institute of Technology. And finally, in the third part, we'll take questions from you. So if you have any questions, I would ask you to kindly reserve them towards the middle or the latter half of this webinar, and share them with us in via the chat window, and we'll try to get to as many, if not all of them, as soon as this session is done. So let's get started. Now, companies, not just technology companies, but all companies have evolved. Right? There's a famous saying that says you don't get points for using servers, you only get points for serving users. What does that mean? In the old world, IT departments, technology departments, the back offices spent a lot of money, spent millions and billions of dollars, stacking up on all of this infrastructure and buying servers, buying networking equipment, buying wires, buying cables, cooling equipment for server rooms, and so on and so forth. And they built this massive infrastructure in order to deploy certain applications, in order to run some of their internal applications or customer-facing applications, and that's how a business ran from a technology perspective. Now, over time, they realized that a lot of this can be removed, can be eliminated from their own books, and and it becomes less of their own headache. So they're spending a lot less time wrestling with these servers, and instead they're spending a lot more time building intuitive, engaging products for users. And what used to take months and months of procurement and decision making from an IT department is now a fairly straightforward process of going online, signing up for either an AWS or an Azure or a Google Cloud or a related software as a service or a platform as a service or an IaaS platform. And quite often the setup takes a matter of a few hours or a couple of days. You then get comfortable with using the various services that it offers. And if you're trying to build something fairly basic, then you can be up and running in no time. Some of the companies that you see on the screen here, companies such as Rubrik, Stripe, Cloud Health, Looker, they come from a variety of different industries. What they all have in common, though, is the ability or something that they actually used as an option to develop a customer base of millions and millions across multiple different countries, basically at the flip of a switch. They didn't have to, as you saw on the previous slide, provision a bunch of servers, buy them, go through a procurement process, raise a lot of money to go and buy servers and other equipment. If you think about how a company like Stripe, which is basically a payment processing system as well as a small and medium business all-in-one financial toolkit, right? The fact that they serve over 100,000 businesses in over 100 countries, for them to be able to do that would have taken them years and years and years of building out infrastructure capabilities across the world. Whereas what they're able to do now is piggyback on a number of other companies and providers who've over the years spent billions and billions, such as AWS, companies such as Microsoft, who invested all of this money in putting all of this infrastructure in place, and companies like Stripe and Cloud Health and Rubrik and Looker are able to piggyback on them. Of course, they compensate them for it, but they're able to jump on top of their, what in the financial world would be called capital expenditure. What that's enabled them to do is with fewer engineers, less investment, and a lot less headache, focus all of their energy on building great products. That is their specialty, not infrastructure management, not the ability to combine databases and networks and switches and so on. It's the ability to build an intuitive product for the customers. So it's not just about reducing cost. It's also about specialization. What the cloud has enabled the world to do. That is really where the power of the cloud computing paradigm is. Some important numbers here that you'll see up on screen. Now, the second number right on top estimates that the cloud computing spend by 2020 will reach $162 billion. Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg, because if you see the number to its immediate left, all of enterprise IT spend, and that's just the current number, it's likely to go up, is $1.2 trillion. And it's orders of magnitude bigger than what cloud computing spend is across all companies. What does this mean? As enterprise IT starts to move away from the old, boxes in a room paradigm, cloud computing is likely to take a big chunk of that, if not a vast majority of that spend. But guess what? This is not some pie-in-the-sky future dream. 2/3 of companies right now are using public, private, or hybrid clouds. That number is conceivably a little less in India, but over half of the companies are already using some form of the cloud. And not just that, a vast majority of the companies using clouds are using multiple clouds. What does using multiple clouds mean? You could be using an AWS cloud, you could be simultaneously using an Azure cloud or a Google cloud. You might actually build out your own private cloud environment, something that you'll learn over the course of this program. So all of this is already available, and all this is happening. And while AWS is people use AWS and cloud synonymously, yes, they're the largest. They have the largest market share, but Azure is not far behind. It's catching up, right? Google Cloud is a distant fourth, but it's catching up. And everybody from Oracle to Salesforce is building out a cloud solution that's going to challenge AWS's preeminent position in the cloud market. And as I mentioned before, it's not an all or nothing game. You might be a company that uses AWS, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are only an AWS shop. Most companies use more than one public clouds, and most companies simultaneously also use private clouds for various applications. And this combination, this hybridization of using multiple sources of infrastructure, building on various platforms, using a variety of different software tools, software as a service tools, all of this is because of the fact that not everybody's use case is the same, and various companies, various platforms, various services have their own relative strengths, and most companies want to use these strengths. The one other number that I really want to highlight on this is the one on the bottom right, which states that nearly 3/4 of all CFOs have said that cloud computing will have the biggest impact, financial impact, on their business in the year 2017, one way or the other. Right? If you think about the fact that if you are a Netflix, right? A couple of years ago, Netflix basically went from being available in a select few countries, just in the US, 1 or 2 Asian countries and a couple of European countries, to simultaneously being available in over 100 countries. Famously, they use AWS, but they also use other public clouds, and they have their own private cloud. Now, the reason they were able to, at the flip of a switch on one single day, turn on services for over 100 countries is because they were on the cloud. And that kind of a financial impact is hard to replicate. And most CFOs are looking to make that kind of an investment on behalf of their company, and are looking to maximize their their return on investment. Now, all of these sound like really large abstract numbers. A lot of you might think that these kinds of things are happening in the Netflixes of the world and potentially in Silicon Valley and a couple of select large companies globally. But that's not true. All this is happening in India as well. Now, as this graph shows, obviously the number is a little lower in India, significantly lower. but it's nothing to sneeze at. Right? The estimated public cloud, just the public cloud services market in India, and this is not enterprise IT or any of that stuff, this is just public cloud, is estimated to be 4 billion by 2020. Right? So we're almost at 2018. If you guys do this program, and a couple of years after that, the spend would have already gone from 2.5 billion to 4 billion in the Indian market. That's 3 times growth in about 4 years. That's massive growth. But if you think that we might be at the tail end of this kind of a growth phenomenon, that's not true either. This is really only the beginning of the cloud computing again paradigm. Growth is expected for many years to come. Obviously, it's becoming more mainstream, which is a good thing. But if you look at that green bar at the bottom of this particular graph, and if you see its progression from 2013 all the way to last year, 2016, right? Yes, the number of companies using just purely traditional data centers has come down, but it's still well over half the companies. 63% of all IT infrastructure spend is still on traditional data centers. And as you can see, private cloud is one of the biggest gainers here. Right? So a lot of companies who've invested a lot in infrastructure, who've bought their servers, who've bought their hardware, are going to continue to want to amortize that that expenditure. And how are they going to do that? They're going to build private clouds until such time as they are either comfortable or regulatorily permitted to start using the public cloud. What is all of this built on? Right. So earlier, the earliest version of what you thought about as cloud or cloud computing was purely infrastructure. Right. So all of infrastructure got moved on to basically somebody else's large data center or data farm, and from there, you were able to build out layers and layers of software, of middleware, and basically not have to spend millions of dollars on infrastructure, but then you did everything else. But over time, this whole way of working has evolved. As people have started to become more comfortable with not owning infrastructure, they've moved up the stack and said, hey, I don't need to own the middleware either. Right? The OS, the all of the other middleware, the handshaking between all of my various services and the hardware doesn't need to be managed by me either. Right? Let me focus on what I do well, which is build really good software systems. And then obviously you had other paradigms like containers and microservices that have evolved, that have enabled more simple, modular, consistent software development, allowed you to test and simulate production environments, reduce the complexity of managing apps. People have started using multiple APIs and browser extensions. There have been entire services that create a seamless API gateway. So so it's not months and months of work, but rather again a flip of a switch kind of an approach. And people have gone further, right, and said, hey, you know what? Earlier, all of this was the IT stuff, right? This was the infrastructure, the platform, the middleware, and all of that. But then, the brains of the operation, all of the analysis, the analytics, the database querying, the model building, machine learning, all of that was still done separately. But now there are services for all of that. Right? Elastic analytical databases are now part of the cloud. They're offered as a service. AWS has a service called Redshift. Google has an ability for you to dynamically query very large-scale data using BigQuery. Right? And all of these other services have been built on top of it. So we're moving up the stack, and what used to be just somebody owning infrastructure and servers and networks and cables and databases and renting you space has now evolved into something that's much more of a suite of offerings, a menu of various options and services that you as a business owner, as a technology company, or as a technology service provider can just plug and play. Now, naturally, as all of this has become, gone away from just being the nuts and bolts and the hardware and the network cables and so on into becoming a lot richer and a lot more robust as an ecosystem. With that comes the necessity for a higher order of skills. Right? Whereas the earliest cloud computing skills was largely, again, infrastructure, network, storage, and things like that. Now, a lot of cloud computing skills involve the ability to build applications on the cloud, to do DevOps on the cloud, which is the whole software development and management lifecycle, to architect entire solutions on the cloud without any native infrastructure, to handle multiple clouds, to stitch together services from across various platforms. And all of this has meant that in really people who really know this stuff, and people who can make wise, well thought out, well-decisioned choices are actually at a premium. As you can see from this table, obviously this is just one of many studies. It's right up there. Even if I don't entirely believe that this is the very top of the heap, this is very much up there. This is a highly compensated kind of a role. This is a function that is, where skills are, some of the basic skills are easy to come by, but people who are truly skilled in this area are still very much in demand because there's a scarcity of them. And as I said, there's a whole world beyond just infrastructure. Right? The most desired skills in cloud computing, they span the entire stack. As some of the things that I've circled there, infrastructure as a service has moved up to platform as a service. Right? So there's a whole way of now building applications using containers that's highly in demand. There's a whole way of managing your entire DevOps integration, deployment, testing cycle on the cloud that's highly in demand. As more and more companies are moving in either predominantly or entirely onto the cloud as ways of operating. Yeah, and as an architect or an architect in training, or even a DevOps professional or a developer or a development manager, understanding these evolutions, learning how to work with all of these different ways of what used to be a different model of IT, right? This has become very important. Now, obviously, you see the things on the left are more fuzzy. Right? The ability to talk to customers, building and maintaining global scale systems, understanding business requirements and translating that, DevOps, platform as a service, understanding how to build with containers. All of this is really important, but it's not necessarily true that these are the only skills that are important. That's not how I would interpret this graph. How I would interpret this graph is that these are the skills that are most scarce. Right? Companies are looking for people with these skills and are not able to find them. Now, some of the roles on the right, infrastructure as a service, which is more traditionally known as what used to be the cloud. It's not to say that it's not desired by companies. It's just that it's more of a solved problem. There are more people out there who have these skills because they've been learning this for a while. Infrastructure as a service is a little more developed and mature as an area, and therefore the market is a little more competitive, whereas some of the things on the left, people just can't find people, sufficiently qualified professionals in these areas. So I really would, think hard and question, how I could build a career in one of the areas on the left. That's the real play here. And if you look at some of the top skills on the cloud, this is an aggregation of various surveys. The consensus seems to be fairly obvious, right? As you can see in a lot of this, not a lot of it is about how do you configure a server and things like that. It's not to say that that's not important. I think basically what everybody has come to the realization is that stuff is a little more commoditized. You need to know it, but that's not enough. It's like in the early days, if you could operate a computer, you were a highly skilled professional, and people would pay you a lot. Right? That doesn't mean that knowing how to operate a computer is any less vital now. Arguably, it's a lot more vital, but it's not a differentiator anymore. What is truly a differentiator on the cloud are all of these different services and ways of operating that are enabled by the cloud. So containers as a way of developing applications on the cloud, DevOps on the cloud. Right? Thinking about cloud governance and security as an architect or as a CIO or as a CTO. Right? How do I manage and secure all of these different pipes going in and out. Enterprise cloud migration, because as we've just seen in one of the earlier graphs, if all of these companies are now moving on to either the private or the public cloud, guess what? They're not starting from scratch, right? They have to migrate a whole bunch of their services, their data, their processes, all the way onto the cloud. How do you do that? What is the right way to do that? That's a very, very important skill. So hopefully this establishes in your mind a little bit of the urgency, right, and the demand and the need for cloud computing, and what are the opportunities available. If I had to sum everything up, it's to say that the cloud computing ecosystem has been around for a while. It used to be largely a infrastructure as a service kind of an operation, but now nearly every computing backbone service has moved on to the cloud. They want you to work less and less on the complexities of building and managing, all of these fairly complicated systems, and they want you to focus most of your energy on understanding your customer and solving your particular customer need as a company and going and running your business. Now with that, there's a whole higher level of abstraction and a whole higher level of skills, everything from cloud migration to governance, security, DevOps, development using containers and microservices, databases, big data and analytics applications. All of these are the need of the hour, and all of these are really where a lot of new opportunities are.